Disney Lorcana just keeps growing and growing. This week, we had 5 reported events with 320 registered players. An incredible amount of information, lots to break into, and we're going to even see a full meta analysis of the top 40 decks from this weekend. Let's get into the video. The 5 events were hosted across the entire world again, coming in from all the way at the Octagon's 2023 convention, which had 129 players. Then we go to Games Castle in Austin that had 52 registered players, along with CM Games in Tennessee that had 78 players. And then we had a couple smaller events in Apex Gaming, with 27 players, and the Geekery from Kansas City with 33 players. 320 players across 5 events came out to be a wonderful weekend for Disney Lorcana, and by far the largest. Last weekend, we had a 60-player event, and in this weekend alone, we had an 80 and 129 players. That is an incredible growth spurt for the game of Disney Lorcana, specifically in the last week in September, only being 6 weeks from release. Let's talk about the deck on the rise, and one of the more successful decks on the weekend that keeps gaining traction. The deck on the rise this week is Emerald Amethyst. It came in with 5 top 8s this weekend. So there was 5 events, and it might not have been one in all 5 of the top 8s, but there were 5 different decks that did succeed and were successful in top 8s or top 4s. Definitely a deck that has been growing and growing in popularity, as it is a budget deck. This deck comes in around $200. It's very accessible to players that can't really find cards and really only have to put some weight into buying, in most cases, just Cusco. But some other versions do run John Silver now, which does up the deck to about $250, depending how many copies that you want to play of it. Nonetheless, let's break this one down. So the key strategies here are the early threats, the mid-range threats, and the card draw to complement it quite well. The early threats being Olaf, Pascal, and Flynn Rider. And I know, it's probably funny to hear that Olaf is a threat, but guys, 1/3s in this game are the best aggressive characters to play. Olaf and Minnie Mouse from Ruby are the only two 1/3s in Chapter 1, and they're honestly vastly underplayed, and we're finally starting to see players adapt to it. No Dukes in this list, no Archimedes in this list. We went through the Pascal and the Olaf, which I think is a big deal, and it's an understanding that aggressive players need to be doing things like that. Of course, Flynn Rider and Pascal have been known for quite some time, really great at pressuring the game early. Pascal does leave itself open to early removal, such as Fire Their Cannons, but honestly, a theme of this deck is just losing to steal cards, so you can't really do much about it. The mid-range threats here are the 4s and 5s with Hans, Scheming Prince, Mad Hatter, and Cusco. All of these decks just all of these cards read, when I play them, I have 3 lore, you have to answer me, or I'm going to gain 3 lore. Cusco being Ward is incredible. Mad Hatter being a 5 cost that when they challenge him, you get to draw a card. And of course, Hans is a 4 cost with 3 lore, which is the best rate in the game currently. And card draw, in all honesty, we could just have friends on the other side here, and it would be kind of the same thing. Yes, Maleficent is a good replacer. Yes, Maleficent sings friends on the other side. The complementary suite we'll see later on as I break down a full version of this list from a friend of the channel. But all in all, this deck is mostly Emerald themed. It's normally like closer to a 75-25 split between Emerald to Amethyst, but it just shows how good Amethyst is and how much Amethyst has to offer just about any type of deck in the metagame. Nonetheless, this deck has been successful each and every week over the last month and a half, and it needs to be warranted that this deck deserves its just desserts and absolutely is the deck of the week, coming in with 5 top 8s for my bet, a very underplayed deck most likely across the events as a total. Over the last several weeks, we have seen the meta adapt and evolve, grow and change. And this week is no difference. But I would like to kind of remind everyone of what the last couple weeks have looked like so you can get a full circle picture of how the meta has been adapting. So let's look at the charts from weeks 4 and 5 before we go into the data for week 6. In week 4, we saw a sheer dominance of Ruby Amethyst, with Amber Steel kind of sitting in the back, being just there. In week 5, we've seen a complete adaptation that Amber Steel became way more of a force to be reckoned with, lessening the number of Ruby Amethyst, and we saw an uptick in several different decks of Amber Sapphire and Emerald Amethyst. Now, what's interesting about these few weeks here is a slow decline from week 4 to week 5 in Ruby Amethyst and a large uptick from Amber Steel. Now, there's a couple things I'd like to point out that, again, these are top 8 decks. They're not winning decks. Since most events have not been concluded with an actual winner, it is notable. Also, just to note, the decks that have won events that have gone to a declare winner have been Ruby Amethyst and Amber Steel. Now, granted, when you look at the top 8 decks and you can see the numbers, it's not shocking that these decks are the ones winning events because of just the sheer number of them in top 8s. If there's 2 or 3 Ruby Amethyst in a top 8, the likeliness of one of them winning versus another deck isn't, the odds are in their favor, obviously. And the same can be said for Amber Steel. But it is notable that, we can see from week 4 to week 5 that there was a large difference in variety. And we're going to be pretty excited to see that in week 6, there's no difference there. Week 6, we can see, once again, is a pretty even keel of decks. Ruby Amethyst sitting at 13 out of 40. Amber Steel sitting at 12 out of 40. Emerald Amethyst had 5. Amber Sapphire had 3. And then each of the decks below either had 1 or 2 showings. Now, I understand that this only is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different decks. However, when you start to consider that 9 different decks out of 40 top 8 decks, that's a really good variety of options. And when you start to consider that some of the decks from last week were not even on the list for this week, it just means that the potential of the different decks in the metagame is quite large. Yes, the dominant decks are clear, right? Ruby, Amethyst, and Amber Steel are very clearly the best decks in the game. They're the most successful, the most consistent. We see them every week. We see at least one of them in every top 8 almost. And then it goes down to the next things. Last week, we had Amber Sapphire that had a very good week. This week, we had Emerald Amethyst with a really good week. But you still had these other decks that kind of showed up. This week also had a brand new deck, which will be the deck on the rise this week that we'll be discussing as well. But 9 decks out of top 40 just creates the ability that you can take any one of these decks and make a win out of it. I understand that top 8s are not wins. I get that. However, every one of the top 8 decks needs to hit a certain number of points or a win ratio to get into the top 8. Most times in top 8, the difference between the deck that finished in first place and the deck that finished in second place is either a draw or a win, not necessarily a loss all the time. So when you start considering those things, you have to understand that getting into a top 8 puts all of these decks on a pretty even keel. Yes, it's unfortunate that we have not gotten more and more declared winners of events to really determine exactly how good a deck was in a given event or in a given top 8, because it also plays a very key factor in matchups as once you get to top 8. But data is data at the end of the day, and these reports coming in are showcasing decks from all over the world and players from all over the nation that are playing in particular events, bringing these cards, spending their money to play in events with these decks. And it's absolutely notable that this is the current metagame to look at. Now, let's get into the deck on the rise. The deck on the rise is a first. This is the absolute first time we have seen Ruby Amber top 8 an event after 6 weeks of competitive play. Now, if you really look at this deck and you really want to break it down, it's actually really interesting. And I'm going to break it down. I'm going to put it back on there. But the concept of taking the Amber draw and facilitation and adding it to Ruby to try and create this mirrored image of the Amethyst version has been something that players have been trying to get right for a little bit of time. Finally, we have the first one to really take a note and look at and break down. So this list coming in as a very straightforward list with of the following cards: Stitch, Zimba, Gaston, Aladdin, Maui, uh, Rockstar Stitch, Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, Maleficent, You Have Forgotten Me, Dragon's Fire, Be Our Guest. Followed in with the threes in this list, which are Carefree Surfer, Mickey Mouse BLT, and then we have a couple two ofs following the suite of LeFou, Be Prepared, and Shield of Virtue. In this Ruby Amber deck, the Amber is definitely 100% trying to replicate what Amethyst can do for the control version of Ruby as well. Adding in the additional threats of Rapunzel, Rockstar Stitch, Carefree Surfer to add additional draw power, adding in the early game with Stitch and Zimba, along with even Gaston as another threat to, clearing out opposing boards, is a very interesting mesh of this control-ish mid-range deck. It has a lot to offer. It's definitely not a deck that I particularly played any games with whatsoever. So this is just an outsider's opinion looking in. I am very, very curious to why we're not a fan of Ariel Spectacular Singer in this deck. It's the one card that I would love to point out. If I'm going to be playing Amber in place of Amethyst, then I want to give myself even more chance to find Be Prepared. Unless, of course, the game plan here is just not Be Prepared. Ruby Amethyst very much is planning to play Be Prepared and then capitalize off of that. And this deck might just be using Be Prepared as more of a reset button when it gets behind, which I can totally respect that particular playline. All in all, it's the first time we are seeing this deck in its entirety being successful in any given week, which is exciting enough to definitely give a shout out to Robert Brake for this wonderful, successful list of his finding its way into a top 8. If you've been enjoying this content today and you'd like to continue to see more of it, I suggest you hit the subscribe button and like the video. Of course, as always, we are looking to grow the Forbidden Mountain. October is a big month for us, and there is a lot to cover with the upcoming Miami. With that, we are looking to level up our content, and through that, there are a couple ways that you can help us do that. The first is by becoming a member on YouTube. If you just want to give us a quick little support right here on the platform, join the channel as a member, and that would be really greatly appreciated. If you want to go a step further and you weren't sure, we actually have a Patreon. Our Patreon does have a bit of an access tier for a higher, more expensive cost, but if you're just looking to pitch in and give us, honestly, a thank you for all the work and effort that we put in, we would greatly appreciate that as well. Lastly, I need to know right now what your vibes are after 6 weeks of the metagame. Hit me up in the comments and let me know what's your favorite deck to play in Disney Lorcana through 6 weeks of competitive games. Now, let's break into some spotlight decks from friends that were successful this weekend in various events across the nation. Liam from the Illumineers was a top 4 competitor in the Games Castle event in Austin, Texas. He was representing the Emerald Amethyst deck that we were basically talked about in the beginning here. This deck is a very straightforward version, and it does have some little linchpins of curiosity. Repping the Olaf Pascal Flynn suite, complement it with Megara. Megara in this list is one of my favorite cards, and it has been since the first time I've seen the deck. The ability to, use our Olaf in 2 different ways in certain aggro mirror matches is second to none. When you're able to play your Olaf early and then play Megara to buff your Olaf to take out opposing Zimbas, it's just a real turn of events for the matchup. Your opponent's definitely not expecting it, and it's wonderful. But even Meg later on in the game is quite successful. Using Meg to buff a Rafiki or buff a Maleficent is a wonderful play. Buffing a Cheshire Cat, another wonderful, unexpected line of events when you have to do it. So saying that, it's a wonderful card that I love to see. The other interesting card in this list specifically is a one of Befuddle, which we actually had a very long conversation about whether or not he wanted to keep that in the list. It definitely has a place in Amethyst list. However, this might not be the best utilization of it, and you might simply be able to trade it in for the 4th Olaf if you'd rather do that. All in all, the addition of Genie and Mother Gothel for some slight removal, the overall power of the end game with Hans, with Cusco, with Mad Hatter, and then the follow-up addition to John Silver, putting this deck a little bit over the normal budget that you can see it in. And I think that even Liam will tell you that if you didn't want to spend the extra $60 or $70 on John Silvers for this list, that you can definitely separate them in and filter in some cheaper cards and it still be mostly successful. The deck has been one of the better decks, and Liam told me that he felt really good about the deck on the day and would have been comfortable playing out to see if he was able to win the event as a whole. Congratulations to our friend Liam. Check out his video breakdown on this particular event. I'll put it in the description for you. Now, let's talk about another one of our friends of the channel. Nick Rauch won the Apex Gaming Invitational, which is a $2,000 invitational for 27 players. Now, I talked about this last week. It is incredible to see certain stores really shilling out and guaranteeing prizes without a particular, attendance barrier. So with 27 players traveling to Ohio to play in an event that was guaranteed $2,000 in prizes, the EV on this event in particular was phenomenal. And a $500 first place prize in a 27 player event, can't really beat that. So shout out to Apex Gaming for really giving Disney Lorcana a try. Their next event is coming up. I'll put the link to it in the description below. If you're in the Ohio area, Western PA area, things like that, it's definitely an event that might be worth traveling to because 2,000 in prizes is phenomenal. And if you're only a couple hours away, it's definitely worth playing. For me, it's about a 10-hour drive, so it's not necessarily too feasible. I do wish it was a little closer because I would definitely be attending these events if it was in 3 hours. I can tell you that for sure. Let's break down Nick's deck. Amber Steel has been my favorite deck since the incarnation of Ursula's Necklace, which again, I've said on several occasions now, doesn't even see plays in this deck. But the song aspect with Ariel Spectacular Singer, the addition of Be Our Guest, A Whole New World, Grab Your Swords, and the wonderful way to refill your hand on a constant basis through Rapunzel and through Rockstar Stitch is just such a fun line of decks to play. Shout out to the particular interesting factors of this list that we haven't seen in previous weeks. The addition of the 2-cost Steel Aladdin with 2 lore as a 2/1 is a wonderful addition and a great pressure. I believe Nick himself actually said that this particular card was just meant to play into what this deck really is. It can be 100% an auto shift from aggressor to control. It is an aggressor in the matchup that it needs to be, which is against Ruby Amethyst, and it's a control deck against any of the mirror matches. Tinkerbell and Grab Your Swords are just really good at removing boards and clearing them out. Honestly, the Apex Gaming stream is still live. I'll put it in the description below. If you go and watch the top 8, you get to see all 3 of Nick's games from the top 8, 2 of which against Ruby Amethyst and the other against Emerald Amethyst. And you can see right in 3 games how different the lines of play this deck is on A, when it's on the play, B, when it's on the draw, C, when it's against control, and D, when it's against aggro. You can get a full showcase of this list through watching that stream. Honestly, Nick is a great player. He comes from World of Warcraft trading card game, which is a game that I played years ago as well. We were both, quote, professional card gamers within the World of Warcraft realm. And it's really exciting to see another player from that world come in and win a big event and really put a staple on the meaning of the way this game is played and how the 2 games really do, they're really parallel to one another with a lot of the rules. And it's nice to see that early consistency of a decade ago or more, in all honesty, was able to translate so well in Disney Lorcana. And it's really exciting to see friends of the past come back and be successful in a brand new game with a lot of parallel, like traits, which is great. This deck is phenomenal. This deck is one of the best decks in the game. Again, for my money, the way that I like to play Disney Lorcana, the way I like to play trading card games in general, this is like a carbon copy version of what I would be playing in any given event coming this weekend. Again, that's a personal preference. I'm not saying it's for everybody. I'm not saying this deck is, the easiest deck to pilot either. Yes, there are hands, there are scripts that just play out and your opponent just legitimately can't stop you. But I can make that same argument for 3 or 4 or even 5 of the decks in the metagame currently. And that's the most exciting thing about Disney Lorcana. But it really was nice to see, this wonderful version of this deck with the incarnation and addition of Aladdin, just to lean into the matchups. Like, I want to make my Ruby Amethyst matchup that much better, so I'm going to pressure this much more. And I think this card does more for me than another, two cards card that has one lore. So one last time, shout out and congrats to Nick. Great showing, great way to pick up a win and showcase the true power of this deck throughout the top 8. Here we are again at the end of week 6, and the one thing we have left to do is rank the inks. It's been a really fun segment. It's been a lot of conversation, and I want to continue this. If you disagree with me or you agree with me, I'd love to know in the comments what your particular list is. Feel free to list the entire thing out. Feel free to list your best or your worst, whatever you want to do. Hit me up in the comments and let me know what your current ink rankings are in the game, as we're about officially halfway through the metagame, because in about 6 weeks, I know this is crazy to hear, but in about 6 weeks, Rise of the Floodborn will be released to the public, and we'll have a brand new metagame to talk about. But today, let's check out the list. That's right. Amethyst has staked its claim back on top of the mountain peak, and with good reason. It was the most successful deck, hitting the most top 8s this weekend. The addition of Emerald finally now really coming out and becoming a more and more threat to the metagame has led to Amethyst being back on top. Last week, in a similar fashion, we had Amber with Amber Steel being basically a tie with Ruby Amethyst, but then we had the Amber Sapphire deck that came out and was being successful as well. So Amber was able to successfully climb to the top of the mountain. This week, it's not the same. Amethyst came out swinging and had multiple different decks across multiple different events, continuously top 8, and it was the most played in Ruby Amethyst, being the #1 deck as well. Got to give some just desserts, got to give the shout out. But at the end of the day, Amethyst is absolutely dominating the metagame this week with a total showcase across 3 or 4 different versions of pairings. Amber coming in at second, still no shock. Again, I do believe in the end of the day, this is a 1A, 1B scenario. And on any given week, you could see these two flip-flops. It's very, very difficult, I think, for any of the other inks to get into this particular number right now, just because everything that Amber and Amethyst are offering to whatever ink they're being paired with. So just to kind of take that with a grain of salt. The other big swing here is Emerald. Emerald takes over the #4 spot. In all honesty, there could be a world where Emerald might actually start taking over the #3 spot, but it's really difficult to see that unless more and more Emerald decks are, able to become successful, because the success of Amber Steel is really hard to debate, and Steel's offering to that deck in particular is so very strong. So it's really hard to see, but more and more I've seen of Emerald deck success, like, it's actually been a really great thing. And the fact that it's a budget deck, it is a budget ink. It's likely the most cheapest thing in the game. Again, I don't think that every Emerald deck needs John Silver. So if you don't need John Silver, you can very much create these budget Emerald decks for anywhere between like the 150 and 225 range, depending on the pairing you're going with. So if you're on the budget side of it and you really want to get in the competitive side of the game, my first tip to you is honestly buying a set of Emerald ink. I think it'll go a long way in your deck building, and then you can choose from several different colors so far. Sapphire bumps down just because it was a lot less played this weekend, a lot less success this weekend. Not enough people really picked it up to bring it up. Ruby, honestly, could, if I'm being completely honest with you, probably should be above Sapphire this week. But Sapphire still was in existence. It still was being featured across multiple different decks. And aside from the one, Ruby Emerald or Ruby Amber deck being sort of new, it's hard for Ruby to really move above it. It is offering so much to the best deck, but aside from that, it's still hard for me to really look at it as a complete ink. And it just feels like the worst ink again this week. However, I will say it was better this week. I just don't think it was better than any of these other inks in any which fashion. And it's really being held up and supported by the other inks much better. And even the cards in the given decks that are being paired with it are all like the more stronger versions of the deck. And that's why at the end of the day, I think it sits at the bottom. Not that it's bad. Again, like Ruby is a very good ink. All of these inks are very good in what they're doing. It's just a matter of when I look across the board and I look at the pairings, I say, what is the most dominant thing in this deck? And what is the reason I'm going to be able to securely win a game of Disney Lorcana? And it's never specifically because of the Ruby cards. It's normally because of the setup to get to the Ruby cards. And that's the big deal here. So all in all, if you made it this far in the video, please hit the like button, hit that subscribe. If you like videos like this, I have much more coming this month. October is a very, very big month. Check it out. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will catch you in the next video.